We've got some Monday Night Football down in Texas as the Houston Texans take on the Dallas Cowboys. My name's CJ Curry. In today's video, we're going to be taking a look at a few different options for you over on PrizePicks. So if you're new to the channel and haven't subscribed yet, do that now. Free for you to subscribe. I'm dropping player prop videos Monday through Friday here on the channel. And make sure you turn on those notifications so you don't miss out. Let's set today's like goal of 149.5 likes. I'm taking the over on that number, meaning I need you guys to help me slap the like button at least 150 times for us to cash out. All right, it's been a while since I did one of these NFL videos, but I had some comments in previous videos asking me, hey man, where are those NFL videos? Hey man, you gonna do any more football videos? Well, here you go. To those who are asking, here's your NFL video. So kind of an ugly game today. If we take a look at it, you got the Houston Texans as 7-point favorites tonight going up against Dallas in Dallas. This total is about 41 implied points between these two teams. CeeDee Lamb is questionable, so we're not sure how healthy he's going to be. Obviously, Dak Prescott was just announced earlier this week that he is out for the season. So Dak Prescott not coming back after signing that big lucrative contract. And the other piece of news that's important is Rico Dowdle was named the official RB1, the starting running back for the Dallas Cowboys. Now for the Houston Texans, they're getting Nico Collins back, a guy that has been sorely missed. Obviously, they had Stephon Diggs, but he's out for the year, so it'll be the Nico Collins and Tank Dell show in the passing attack for the Houston Texans. They still got Joe Mixon, obviously, in the backfield, who's had a tremendous season so far, and he's done especially well in games where the Houston Texans have been able to mount a lead, and then they could just turn around and lean on that stud running back they have behind them. One other piece of information that I want to pull out there is that Dalton Schultz, the tight end for the Houston Texans, former Dallas Cowboy, kind of returning back to the Big D, a little bit of a revenge narrative there. And we'll talk about one of his player props that I'm liking right now. So let's start with Dalton Schultz of the Houston Texans. Dalton Schultz has done a pretty good job covering the 2.5 receptions number. So that's one that I like going back to tonight. Now, Dallas, historically speaking, for the season, has done a pretty good job against opposing tight ends and kind of limiting them. But Dalton Schultz here doing a pretty darn good job himself of catching at least 3 balls per game. Now, with Nico Collins back, that could do one of two things. That could impact Schultz negatively or positively. Negatively in the fact that maybe more of those targets are routed to a guy like Nico Collins, being that he's back in the starting lineup, but positively meaning maybe the Dallas defense focuses on Nico Collins and Tank Dell a little bit more, leaving Dalton Schultz open in the middle. But nonetheless, I could see a scenario where Houston tries to pepper their tight end Dalton Schultz with targets tonight, and hopefully he catches those targets and turns them into receptions going up against his former team, the Dallas Cowboys. Taking a look at the receptions, though, for Dalton Schultz this season, you can see that in 7 out of 10 games, he's had at least 3 receptions or more. So 70% hit rate. He's averaging right there at 3 receptions per game. And you got to like what you're seeing here. I mean, this should be a game where the passing attack is working for the first half at least, maybe the first 3 quarters, and then I could see the passing attack start to dwindle as long as Houston builds a big lead heading into the 4th quarter. Then you could see it turn into like the Joe Mixon show. So if you wanted to go like more Joe Mixon overs in the NFL second half player prop category, I like that as well, pending that Houston is up and building a big lead. But anyway, Schultz over 2.5 receptions, not looking too shabby, if I do say so myself. Now, taking a look at some of the projections, of course, we've got some of the best projection models at our disposal. One of the top projection models that you're going to find out there is called The Blitz. It's by Derek Carty, and they do a really good job of projecting what's going to happen in an NFL game. So let's take a look at the receptions here for Dalton Schultz. When we do so, you can see he's projected for about 2.89 receptions, definitely putting him closer to that 3 reception number than 2. So definitely would lean toward the over at the 2.5 mark. Another one of my favorite player projection sites here is going to be Fantasy Labs. Now, Fantasy Labs, they have kind of a two-headed monster that they use over there. And the two-headed monster is a guy named Sean Kerner and Chris Raybon. Those two guys, two of the best NFL minds, they put their projections together. And as you can see, they've got Dalton Schultz consensus projected for 2.9 receptions tonight going up against the Dallas Cowboys. So Schultz is projecting well on two different sites, and he's got a good historical hit rate of clearing this. And there's a little bit of that revenge factor, revenge narrative sprinkled in there too for those of you who like to bet on a good story. So let's go with another Houston Texan guy. I kind of alluded to this earlier, Joe Mixon. Joe Mixon over 17.5 fantasy score looks really spicy today. The reason I'm liking this one is because Mixon has done a very solid job this season of clearing 17.5 fantasy score, especially whenever the Houston Texans are winning. In the 7 games that he's appeared, he's gone over in 4 out of 7 games. So not a bad hit rate overall, averaging about 20.7 fantasy points per game. And then when you take a look at the games in which the Houston Texans have won by 7 or more points, there's only one game where that scenario has happened. He had 27.2 fantasy score in that game. Now, if you take a look at some of the games in which, Houston has just won in general by any margin, he's cleared this number in 3 out of 4 games. So when Houston's able to get out to a lead, when they win these games, Joe Mixon usually has a big hand in it. 75% hit rate, 3 out of 4, and he's averaging 21.3 fantasy points per game. The only game in which he did not clear was this one against the Chicago Bears. I'm pretty sure this is the game where he ended up getting injured, and therefore that is why he had just 8 fantasy score in that one. So taking a look at some more information on Joe Mixon. If you take a look at the running back position for the entire season and how Dallas has defended against opposing running backs, or more noteworthy, how many fantasy points per game they've given up to opposing running backs. They go up the 4th most fantasy points per game to opposing running backs. So there's only 3 teams giving up more fantasy points per game to opposing tailbacks. That's the Buffalo Bills, the Jacksonville Jaguars, and the Carolina Panthers. So Dallas has not done a great job of defending against opposing tailbacks this season. Now, you can get a more recent sample size if you go to last 4 weeks. This will be the last 4 games that Dallas has played in. And even when we do that, you can see that Dallas has actually went up a little bit, giving up the 3rd most fantasy points per game in that 4-week span. About 25.6 fantasy points per game in those 3 games that Dallas has played over the last 4 weeks. So yes, they are giving up a ton of fantasy points to opposing tailbacks. So we got one of the better running backs in football this season, Joe Mixon, taking the field tonight against Dallas. Now, as far as projections go, I've got those for you. So let's go over to the Blitz real quick. We're taking a look at the Blitz by Derek Carty. You can find this on EV Analytics, or you can go over to Roto Grinders. I'm actually on Roto Grinders now looking at this fantasy score projection. And if you look just above my head here in the cam window, you can see he's projected for about 21.05 fantasy score. Again, his line is just 17.5, but I have to point something out here. The Blitz has him projected for 101 rushing yards, which is a ton of rushing yards. Now, this is a DraftKings projection. So something that's important, DraftKings awards 3 bonus points if a running back goes over 100 rushing yards, but PrizePicks doesn't do that. So we do have to take 3 points off of this projection, which brings him down to about 18 fantasy points. Still puts him over 17.5. I still like him to go over, even though we don't get that 3-point bonus baked into this projection here of 21.05. Let's get you another projection. We're going to go back over to Fantasy Labs for this one. And Fantasy Labs, obviously, they do a fantastic job with their fantasy projections as well. And they've got Joe Mixon all the way up at 20.36 fantasy score tonight. Again, this is Sean Kerner, one of the sharpest NFL fantasy projection type guys in the industry. So I'm going to trust his brain over mine here. And they have him at 20.3 fantasy score on a line of just 17.5. So I like Mixon over 17.5 fantasy score. So what are we going to play from the Dallas side? I mean, that's the big question because there's not a lot to love over there. Like I said, CeeDee Lamb's a little bit beat up. They're starting Cooper Rush, who didn't look great, swapping in for Dak Prescott last week, but Cooper Rush has shown some flashes of greatness in the past. Maybe with more time to prepare for the Houston Texans, we see a new and improved Cooper Rush. I don't know how much CeeDee Lamb we're going to see, but I'm going to go with Jalen Tolbert as a player prop over option. Now, there's 2 different ways you could play Tolbert. I'm thinking fantasy score over 5.5 or receiving yards over 25.5. Tolbert's done a really good job this season with Dak Prescott under center at clearing 5.5 fantasy points, and he's done a pretty good job at clearing 25.5 receiving yards as well. Taking a look at some of the hit rates here provided by Outlier. You can check this out for free for 7 days. Link down in the description of today's video. Outlier.bet is providing all of these colorful, wonderful little charts and graphs here. But you can see the fantasy score for Jalen Tolbert's been pretty good this season. He's cleared this number in 6 out of 9 games, 67% hit rate. He did not clear last week against the Philadelphia Eagles. My Eagles are a tough squad, but maybe he gets back on track today. 9.74 fantasy points per game is what he averages, and he's got some really close calls in his game logs as well. He had 5.4 fantasy score against the Giants, 4.4 against Philly in that blowout game, but still, this could be a situation where Jalen Tolbert gets back over that 5.5 fantasy score number, because you got to imagine with Dallas's 7-point underdogs that they're gonna have to throw the ball, right? They're gonna be playing from behind. And Cooper Rush, whether we like it or not, is going to have to drop back, going to have to pass as long as Houston comes out and hangs up a big number on the scoreboard. Dallas may be trying to play catch up all game long. So I also talked about the receiving yards for Jalen Tolbert. Let's go check those out. Oh, these are the receptions, by the way. If you can find his receptions at 2.5 anywhere, I would take those. They do not offer them on PrizePicks for good reason. He's cleared his receptions line in damn near every single game except for week 1. But let's look at the receiving yards for Jalen Tolbert here. If they have them up on, yeah, there they are. Boom. Receiving yards, he's cleared in 56% of the games, 5 out of 9. He needs 26 actually on PrizePicks because his line is 25.5. So if we switch this over to over 25.5 receiving yards, he hasn't cleared this in the last 2 weeks against Philadelphia and Atlanta, but you know, there's games in there where he's had 82, 87 receiving yards. And if something happens to CeeDee Lamb mid-game where, you know, he gets hurt, re-aggravates whatever's ailing him, then, you know, Jalen Tolbert would basically slot in as that wide receiver number 1 for the Dallas Cowboys. And, you know, somebody's going to have to get targeted. Somebody's going to have to catch the football. And maybe Cooper Rush is the guy to deliver the goods. But you can go fantasy score here or receiving yards. I think Jalen Tolbert is in line for a bounce-back game. In a game in which, like I said, Dallas is going to have to play catch up and probably throw the ball throughout this game. As far as some projections go for Jalen Tolbert, let's start with the fantasy score. Again, his fantasy score is at 5.5 over on PrizePicks. He's getting a projection of 8.59 over on the Blitz by Derek Carty, one of the best NFL projection models out there. Remember, guys, projections are not a 100% lock or guarantee. Sometimes the projection models are wrong here, but when there's a difference of 3 fantasy score, I'm going to take a shot on a guy like Jalen Tolbert. So 8.59 is his projected for the fantasy score. As far as his receiving yards projection, while we're here, we could take a look at that. The receiving yards on the Blitz, he is projected for a healthy number of receiving yards, 40 receiving yards according to the Blitz. So 40 receiving yards on a line of just 25.5. I think that's a pretty big differential there. Line on PrizePicks versus the projection on the Blitz. So you could go receiving yards if you prefer that over the fantasy score. Let's take a look at his projections over on Fantasy Labs. We'll start with the fantasy score again here. Again, CeeDee Lamb is questionable. Maybe Jalen Tolbert gets a few more targets than he typically would. Otherwise, 6.73 is his fantasy score projection, putting him over the 5.5 number on PrizePicks by about 1.2 fantasy score. So there's a projection for the fantasy score for you. Now let's get you a projection for the receiving yards. And for that, we're going to go over here to Fantasy Labs and type in Tolbert's name. And the consensus projection, the Chris Raybon, Sean Kerner projections, when you put them together, they've got a projection for about 28.5 receiving yards, putting him over that 25.5 receiving yards number. So there you go. There's 3 different options for you to consider on tonight's Monday Night Football. Technically 4, because we did look at Tolbert for 2 different plays. But which ones are you liking? Let me know down in the comment section below. Is there any of these that you're liking more than the others? Is there any props for this Monday Night Football matchup that I didn't talk about that maybe you're liking more, better than these? Love to hear your comments, and get an idea of what you guys are playing each and every day. For those of you in Dub Club and Discord, I'll be posting some NBA picks, plays, and parlays. We will see you on the inside. Peace.